Hey everybody, it's Professor Snard here checking in. So it is Wednesday morning, June 5th, when I'm recording this. So we are still kind of finishing up Unit 2, pardon me. But I wanted to get a little bit out in front of Unit 3 because that's really the beginning of the major part of our course. In some ways, it's almost like, we're almost at midterm in our 5-week term because it goes so fast. But Unit 3 is really like the beginning of the major project that we take on, and so it's really important to have a really clear idea of what we're doing and make some good choices early on, because obviously everything is going to scaffold off of what's happening in Unit 3. In fact, I've suggested in earlier announcements, I think, that it's maybe a useful activity for you to actually jump into Units 3, 4, and 5 to kind of see the big picture of where things are going to go and sort of like how they stack up. But I'm going to pay attention to Unit 3 here, again, a little bit in advance of even the due date for Unit 2, but again, just so everyone has a really clear picture of what we're doing in Unit 3 and how that will progress forward, so you're making some good choices here. And then I'll also offer some comments here on the major concepts that we've put into place, and we haven't really done a lot practically with them other than maybe identify some examples. And that's the two main concepts for our course, and again, that are really sort of like the crucial thing to understand in terms not just of the course, but of the main sort of transferable skills that I hope you're going to get out of this particular 1102 that you can, again, put into place in other academic situations, professional situations, even personal situations. So again, that's the discourse community, which is probably the less, the less maybe useful of the two terms, and then the big one is rhetorical situation. And they're clearly related, right, as we've discovered so far. So let me just jump into our units here, and we'll get into Unit 3. So again, the project that we work on is something I've called the fine print project. It involves fine print, no big surprise there. And everything stacks from Unit 3 into 4 and then into Unit 5, where you're ultimately writing a professional email and sending it to an actual person, which is something that might feel like, oh, like it's a business writing class or a professional writing class of some kind. So the professional email is something that you might cover in a class like that. But really, that's just a vehicle for us to think really intentionally and explicitly about these notions of discourse communities and rhetorical situations. Again, rhetorical situation being the more, I think, manageable of those two concepts and the more immediately applicable, although they really both are so intertwined. So we'll jump into Unit 3 here. Okay, so hopefully the instructions themselves here are transparent enough that you can figure out what's going on. But your job is basically to find some fine print, and hopefully we all kind of know what that is. This whole project, or the whole idea for the assignment, started when I happened to look at the back of my debit card from the DuPage Credit Union, and it has this fine print on it that says, this card is property of, etc., etc. Its surrender may be required at any time, which I just thought was kind of funny. Like, at any moment, someone from the DuPage Credit Union can just, like, demand my card. I even like this, and its surrender may be required. It's the, fine print is always so weird, kind of legalese and just like oddly worded. Anyway, like I say here, do I expect this would ever actually happen? Of course not. But it's kind of funny, and we're surrounded by this kind of stuff like everywhere all the time, even though we hardly ever take the time to read it. Like, who has the time to read sometimes these agreements that we're in, like for every time you click agree to use a website or to use a particular app, sometimes it's pages and pages and pages of very fine print and very oddly worded, like legal language. So very few of us read that stuff like thoroughly, right? Even though we probably should. So this is our opportunity, your opportunity, to find some fine print that applies to you. And I've really highlighted this. Like, you don't just want to dig something up randomly or Google fine print and find something that way. We really want to make this finding of the fine print, the research that's going to go into it, and then the writing of this professional email, it should, actually do some work in the world for you. It's not just an assignment for school that you're doing, right? Because I'm making you do it. that's part of it. But obviously what I'm really hoping is that you can experience and discover how your ability to kind of like understand larger discourse communities and understand the sort of language, the idea of the values that govern those communities, how they work, and then to analyze and make yourself a part of a rhetorical situation. Again, like really important life, academic, and professional skills. So we're doing it in a kind of guided way here, but we always want to keep that big picture in mind. So find some fine print that actually applies to you. Again, don't just Google stuff. Don't pick something just kind of like at random. It needs to apply to you. And then the other thing that I'm going to highlight here, and I've got it somewhere, I think here, is obviously, if you use social media of any kind, you're bound by the end user license agreement. These apply to all kinds of different things that we use all the time. Because part of what we're doing is in response to, or sort of like as a follow-up to the fine print that we find that is sort of like puzzling or odd, maybe even kind of alarming or problematic to us, we're going to write a professional email to an actual human being at some company or organization asking about that fine print, like what does it mean, what are the implications, why is it in place, etc., etc. The details are going to be a little bit different for everybody because the fine print is going to be different. But hopefully you're starting to get the idea, right? We find fine print that applies to us, but that's kind of like funky or a little bit weird, and we're going to write an email to somebody, again, using the genre of the professional email. So now we have to begin to understand that rhetorical situation with us, you as the author or the sender, the rhetor, the communicator. The professional email, the email that you write is going to be the artifact or the thing, right, the message. And then obviously you're going to have to determine who the receiver or the recipient of that email is going to be. So it's really important that it applies to you and has some meaning, some impact in your life. And this is our course objective in assessing the feasibility of the research inquiry, kind of a fancy way of saying, like, is this going to work? If you just pick Facebook or some other entity that really has no person that you can email, that's going to be a problem, right? Because where's your email going to go? Can you even find an email address for somebody at a big entity like that? It's kind of funny, like, it's huge. We know there's dozens and dozens and thousands of people who work there, but they're really good at hiding like those particular business emails from us. So there might be some generic like customer service form that you fill in, but that's not what we want. So this is a really good indicator. So we're minute 7 in this video, a video you should be watching. This is like kind of like coming to class. If we end up, or if you end up with fine print that you want to email Facebook, I'm going to just assume that you haven't watched this, and or right, that's sort of like not coming to class, so you're just showing up to do the test, and that's not going to go so well. So again, part of you making this effective is picking fine print that that is like attached to an organization, or it could be a company for sure, but that you've done that front end work to figure out, okay, is there an actual human being that I can send my professional email to so that I can get a response? And that's obviously what we really want, right? You're going to hopefully get a response, hopefully before our class ends, but we can't really control that part of it, that maybe clarifies the language. Or I've had lots of cases where students found clauses in contracts, for example, or rental agreements that were really problematic, even like sort of misworded. Like even the rental agency didn't really intend what they were saying. They had like, just not paid attention to their own fine print. And so I've had students like discover, send that email, and actually get a response back where the rental agency reworded the contract because they realized that it said something that they didn't actually intend. So we're really trying to make the writing that we're doing here have a real world impact and consequence. So that means we got to figure out, is there an actual person that can get this email? Okay, so your job then is to find the email, or to find the fine print, I should say. We'll get to the email part later. And then just build out a little new part of your portfolio where you're kind of telling us about it. So you might be able to cut and paste or grab a screenshot. Again, you're not going to pick the whole of a rental agreement. It has to be a section, a paragraph, a couple of sentences that are really like the part that you're most concerned about. So we don't want to deal with pages and pages of this stuff, even though the excerpt that you pull might be from a document that is pages and pages long. So again, describe what it is, why is it of interest to you, what's problematic about it, and then we'll jump into beginning our annotated bibliography, something that we've already practiced doing as far as the whole professional email genre. But now we're going to begin a new annotated bibliography. We're ultimately going to have 10 sources total, but we'll sort of build those as we go. We're just going to compile 5 right now. So I'm inviting you to use multiple research methods. You can use databases, general web search, again, applying tests for credibility like we've learned in the previous unit. Notice that I'm asking that 2 of the 5 be database sources, so we are kind of getting into more of the academic, scholarly realm of things. The trick, though, is that your research area, right, the sources that are going to populate your annotated bibliography here are completely dependent on the fine print that you're pulling here. So you're not going to find like a research source maybe exactly about the sentence from your, rental agreement. There's not going to, someone probably hasn't written an article about that, right? So we need to be a little bit more flexible. And when you write your email, as we look forward to that, you're not going to quote from your sources like we will have, or maybe you've already discovered, that one of the genre conventions of the professional email is to keep it short and to the point. So we're not going to write like a 4-page research essay and call that our professional email. The research that you're doing here is just going to provide you with a kind of framework, a basis for understanding and again, you kind of got to fill in the blank here based on your particular fine print, sort of the area that you're working in, a specific type of organization, or a community group maybe, a professional field, whether it's like finance or, again, like rental agreements generally. So you have to be sort of flexible. And not every single source is going to be exactly about the same thing. You might have a couple about like the sort of maybe financial aspect, a couple about the company, organization, whatever that is sort of at the root of your fine print, maybe a couple about, I don't even know, related legal cases that are coming out of, or sort of like somewhere in the universe of what you're dealing with. We have to be a little bit flexible, and I can't give you super strict guidelines about yes this and no that, because so much of it is dependent on the particular fine print that you found. If you're having problems, or if things really go off the rails, and I've never actually seen that happen, to be honest with you, we can obviously work through it. So maybe you'd even change your fine print. Very rarely do people do that, because usually they make good choices, and it's like kind of tiring to discover, honestly, how much fine print we're immersed in like all the time, or legally bound by, even though we don't necessarily think about it, probably haven't read it before. Okay, so again, this is what I've just said, thinking broadly about an industry, company, a situation, academic discipline. It's so much is dependent on that fine print. So beginning the annotated bibliography with just 5 of our 10 total sources, at least 2 of the 5 being database sources. Keep in mind that if you're going to use the COD databases and you're not physically on campus, you will need a library card. You got to type in your barcode, so keep that in mind. Again, we're sort of front-loading this stuff so it doesn't surprise anybody. And just like before, we're going to make sure we have MLA formatting for the sources. You want that brief paragraph that sort of summarizes and explains its relevance. So it's not just the listing of the source, but that annotation as well. And so that's kind of all in the background. That's like the main kind of writing work for the course, is developing this list of 10 sources, annotating them all with a brief paragraph. That's like a lot of words that you're going to be writing. Even though the most important writing that we do, or that you do, is going to be that professional email, because that's the thing that actually matters. And again, you're not going to quote your sources. The sources are just going to give you that sort of working knowledge of maybe a variety of fields so that you can craft your professional email in the most effective way possible. Because again, part of what I'm trying to get you to really embrace and to learn and to transfer out of the course is how to operate most effectively in really multiple rhetorical situations. But the one that I'm assigning here is the very specific one of you writing that professional email to an actual person at a company or organization or whatever you identify. Okay, so then we just sort of finish things up by updating your portfolio, and that lays the groundwork for moving into the next phases, which will have us building out the bibliography further, beginning to draft and get some feedback on the professional email, and then obviously sending it out. So notice here we have the reply component for the discussion board again. Really important here to be getting some feedback about your initial ideas about your fine print that you're finding. And it's often helpful to see what other people have done too and how they're going to use that. So it's good to provide input, but also to get that feedback and sort of see what other folks are doing too. Okay. So this is hopefully laying the groundwork so you can have a really strong Unit 3, because obviously that sets you up to be successful in Units 4 and 5. As you're discovering, right, the due dates really zoom past. So before you know it, we'll be sending that email and the course will be done. It's kind of crazy. One last little quick note then that's related sort of to the work for Unit 2, where we really looked at discourse community rhetorical situation, trying to provide some examples of those. Again, discourse communities are, because we're immersed in many of them, overlapping, sometimes contesting one another, they're really complicated, right? And it's less important for us to really provide a succinct definition of them. Like I'm never going to quiz you on the definitions that we've found or the readings. It's more the concept that I hope you begin to appreciate and understand. And for rhetorical situation, especially in terms of providing an example, what I was looking for, and the assignment is fairly clear about this, is a particular, specific, actual rhetorical situation that you have been in before. And again, the ideal is to report on like how you managed that. So lots of people came up with pretty good examples. And again, I was looking for something specific. So not just a coach talks to an athlete. That's a type of, or a sort of category of rhetorical situation, but it's not a rhetorical situation. The rhetorical situation only occurs when it actually occurs, right? It's not a theoretical kind of thing. It arises when, the coach for the hockey team in your community talks to player number 15 about a particular thing. So it's that particular moment. And again, because we're asking for examples from your experience, again, what are like the specifics? So in some examples, students identified, or you guys identified yourselves as like the person who was being communicated to, so you're receiving that message. In many cases, you talked about yourself as the rhetorical communicator. So again, it's that level of specificity that we're getting to. And what I hope you take away from the course is that the more kind of adept you can get at analyzing particular rhetorical situations and making really smart choices about, okay, how do I communicate in this particular situation? How do I make my argument, my idea, how do I communicate that most effectively? And that's what's tricky, right? There's no exact rule to follow for every broad type of engagement, and they change over time. A good example is our class as a kind of discourse community that exists within the discourse community of English studies, within the discourse community of higher ed generally, right? All of these overlapping kinds of things. But even a rhetorical moment like you sending an email to me, I think I used this example before, that changes over time. So maybe early in the course, before you really know me, before I know you, before we've done any kind of work for the course, it would be smart, right? You'd make a good rhetorical choice by being maybe a little more formal in an email to me, for example. You might address me more formally. You would be maybe more careful about identifying yourself, explaining like which course you're in, and then being really explicit about what question that you're asking. Like if you're asking about the assignment in Unit 1, you would provide all the context for that, or the assignment in Unit 2. Maybe deeper into the course, right, in a week or two, or maybe even now, depending on your comfort level or the number of interactions that you've had with me, that dynamic might change. So you might become a little less formal. You would be able to refer to something like the fine print project, which you probably wouldn't do early on because you'd looked ahead, because I hadn't talked about it yet. But now we know we share that sort of vocabulary, right? So you can make those rhetorical choices. And like I've said, and I'm wrapping this up now, I promise, we're always making these choices. It's just that we're not always conscious or very intentional about them. And sometimes we make very poor choices because we're not conscious and really intentional about it. But the more conscious you can become, the more intentional you can become, the more effective a communicator you can become. We're going to discover that, I hope, by doing the fine print project. But again, the skill I want you to take away is not just writing a good professional email, but being a good communicator in rhetorical situations, because you're aware of the discourse communities at work, you're aware of the conventions of a rhetorical situation, and you've kind of analyzed the situation to make those good, intentional choices, and it makes you a better and more effective communicator. Okay, long video. Hopefully you watch the whole thing. It's important. And if you have any questions, concerns, just be in touch with me.